History and archaeology are full of hoaxes. The motivations behind the subterfuge can differ greatly, ranging from something as mundane as boredom all the way to, well, outright racism. Sometimes the deception is caught quickly, with historians setting the record straight within a few years. Other times, however, the lies put forth in these hoaxes can persist for centuries. Normally, when people think of these kinds of hoaxes, they immediately think of the discoveries like the Cardiff Giant or Piltdown Man, visual spectacles designed to fool large crowds at a glance. Instead of these more sensationalized hoaxes, today we're going to be looking at some of the most famous literary hoaxes throughout history, all of which also happen to be about history. The modern bathtub was invented in 1828 by Lord John Russell of England. During business trips to England, Cincinnati resident Adam Thompson became fascinated with the things, and finally on December 20th, 1842, he brought the first modern bathtub back with him to the United States. Unfortunately, not everybody back home in Cincinnati was a fan of these new creations. Doctors felt they were dangerous, and many others found them to be undemocratic because of how exorbitantly costly they were. As news of the bathtub spread across the country, so too did this debate. When Philadelphia proposed an ordinance to ban bathing over the controversy, it was only narrowly defeated. Boston, however, would pass theirs, thus effectively banning the practice of bathing from 1845 through to 1862. Controversy died down a bit in 1847 when Brooklyn resident John Simpson invented the zinc bathtub. This drove the price down significantly, thus alleviating the concerns of a classist device being utilized in America. Famous physician Oliver Holmes Sr. from Boston campaigned in favor of the bathtub as well, eventually winning approval for the practice of bathing from the American Medical Association in 1850. Practitioners of homeopathy would follow suit in giving their approval just 3 years later. Also in 1850, Vice President Millard Fillmore visited Adam Thompson's bathtub. After using the device, he became quite a bit of a fan. When President Zachary Taylor died later that year, the newly ascended President Fillmore ordered the construction of the White House's first bathtub. This created a brief controversy over bathtub ownership again, but with the cost lowered, doctors giving their blessing, and the full endorsement of the president, the public finally came around. Fillmore's bathtub would remain in use until finally replaced by Grover Cleveland during his first term as president. It's a rich and fascinating history, and not a single word of it is true. This story was first published on December 28th, 1917 by famed journalist and satirist H.L. Mencken in the New York Evening Mail. His article was titled "A Neglected Anniversary" and lamented that the city's celebration of the 75th anniversary of the bathtub had been quashed by Washington, D.C.'s implementation of prohibition the prior month. The purpose of Mencken's hoax was twofold. The first was to make a point about the gullibility of the American public. The second was for Mencken to entertain himself. Newspapers weren't interested in serious journalism while there was a world war going on, but he still had to write something. The result was a light-hearted hoax, one that he never thought people would actually believe. But he couldn't have been more wrong about that. His story was published in newspapers across the country, and it even found its way into reference books and medical literature. Despite the fact that he stated publicly on numerous occasions that the article was a hoax, and even wrote another article in 1926 to set the record straight, the myth has persisted. As recently as 2008, this story was presented as a fact in a Kia commercial.
President Millard Fillmore, best remembered as the first president to have a running water bathtub. He's unheard of. So we are honoring him during Kia's Unheard of President's Day sale.
Not all hoaxes are as fun or as lighthearted as Mencken's fraudulent history of the bathtub. The Protocols of Elders of Zion is the most dangerous literary hoax ever perpetrated, and they helped fuel the already growing feelings of anti-Semitism in Russia before being exported to Germany, where it was taught in classrooms and was referenced in Hitler's Mein Kampf as being fact. There is dispute over whether the Protocols actually influenced Hitler, as many historians believe that high-ranking Nazis did not believe that the book was authentic. But it didn't matter to them if it was real, because it still suited their purposes. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a 24-chapter book that claimed to document a plot for Jewish world domination. It claimed to be a collection of top-secret records taken from an 1897 meeting in Switzerland of Zionist leaders. Throughout the book, these alleged Jewish leaders discussed plans to conquer all aspects of finance, culture, and government, spreading socialism throughout the world. Hopefully, that description makes it sound like an obviously fake propaganda piece because, well, that's what it was. The book first began circulating in Russia at the turn of the 20th century, most likely in 1902 or 1903. We can't say for sure where the first manuscript came from or who created it, but it was published at least as far back as 1903, where it appeared as a series of articles in the ultra-nationalist newspaper Znamya. Despite not knowing who created the original manuscript or how it was first spread before appearing in the newspaper, we absolutely know who wrote the book. We know this because the entire book is plagiarized, and most of the source material wasn't even anti-Semitic in nature. Some versions of the protocols claim to have been written by Theodor Herzl at the aforementioned 1897 meeting, but the actual authors are Maurice Joly and Hermann Goetsche. Goetsche was an anti-Semitic German novelist, and his work was used to give the protocols that extra bit of flair. But 19 out of the 24 chapters were ripped straight from Joly's Dialogue in Hell between Machiavelli and Montesquieu. Joly's book was a political satire that doesn't actually mention Jewish people at all. It was a criticism of Napoleon III disguised as a conversation between the dead, a tactic employed by Joly since direct criticism of Napoleon was illegal. The effects of this hoax were devastating for the Jewish people, and not just in Russia and Germany. In 1917, a copy of the protocols came back to America, where it was distributed among the United States government. It was the first Red Scare, and the protocols tied the Jewish plan for world domination to socialism, so the United States felt that they had to spread the word. In 1919, the book was published in the Philadelphia newspaper The Public Ledger, but they replaced every instance of the word Jew with the word Bolshevik to make sure that Americans understood that it was communists who were trying to take over the world. In 1921, the book was finally debunked and discovered to be the fraud that it was. It's not really a surprise that it took 20 years to find the original source material for the protocols. The world was in upheaval, and neither of the original works had nationwide notoriety. Joly's Dialogue wasn't even fully translated into English until 2002. Unfortunately, incontrovertible evidence about the provenance of the work was not enough to dissuade readers from taking it seriously. Car manufacturer and famous anti-Semite Henry Ford spent his own money to print and disseminate 500,000 copies of the protocols after the fraud had already been uncovered, until the courts stepped in and forced him to stop. Even though they have been thoroughly debunked, the protocols remain widely available today in numerous different languages. It has been over 100 years since the truth about the book was revealed, but radicalized groups still continue to present the work as genuine to instill fear and hatred. It's no wonder that it has been described as the most influential work of anti-Semitism ever written. Samuel Ireland was an author and engraver, and he had a singular passion for the works of William Shakespeare. He was writing his own book on the topic when he took his teenage son with him to visit places of historical importance to Shakespeare. Samuel was also trying to uncover any bits of lost writing by Shakespeare. It could have been a grocery list for all he cared. So little of Shakespeare's life is actually documented that any discovery would have been an important one. Not only is little of his life documented, but his handwriting is virtually non-existent. There isn't a single copy of one of Shakespeare's plays in his own writing. All that is known to exist are a few signatures and one handwritten speech that he delivered in 1603. Samuel's son William was only 16 years old at the time. As is the case for so many teenage boys with distant fathers, he just wanted his dad to be proud of him. That's why the following year, a mysterious friend of William's, known as Mr. H, discovered a number of documents in an old chest that included a mortgage deed with Shakespeare's signature on it. Samuel was elated with the discovery, and William realized the only way to continue to receive praise from his father was to continue to forge documents. Mr. H must have had a pretty big chest, because William produced correspondence with other actors, copies of Shakespeare's books with annotations written in the margins, a letter from Queen Elizabeth I, a love letter that he had written to his wife, Anne Hathaway, and a declaration of his Protestant faith. All of these items were authenticated by experts and deemed to be genuine at first. However, William had already made his first mistake. Forging Shakespeare's signature or handwriting was one thing, as there was barely anything to compare it against, but forging letters from people whose writing was plentiful, like the Queen, was a much bolder proposition. Still, the inaccuracies flew under the radar for a while. But then William flew too close to the sun. Discovered deep at the bottom of Mr. H's chest were two complete but unpublished plays by Shakespeare, Henry II and Vortigern and Rowena. William was an 18-year-old old apprentice mortgage lawyer that just wanted to impress his dad. Writing an entire play that could mimic Shakespeare flawlessly would have been a daunting task, and indeed, he was not up to the challenge. What he wrote was hardly Shakespeare, even if people didn't know it yet, but the Irelands were still able to sell the production rights to Vortigern and Rowena to London's Drury Lane Theatre for £300 plus 50% of the profits, which is roughly £43,000 today. That's a pretty good payday for a kid's first play, but the success was to be short-lived. Those involved in the play, including actor and theatre manager John Kemble, doubted that the play was authentic, noting that it was much more simplistic than Shakespeare's other works. Kemble suggested running the play on April Fool's Day, but the Irelands objected, so it premiered on April the 2nd. That was to be the only performance of Vortigern and Rowena until it was revived in 2008. 2 days before the show went live, a Shakespearean scholar, Edmund Malone, published a 400-page essay attacking the authenticity of the Ireland's discoveries. This, combined with the play being mediocre, resulted in allegations of forgery against Samuel. William tried to confess to the crimes and even published a confession, but his father wouldn't believe him. Samuel didn't believe that his teenage son could possibly be capable of forging all the documents or writing 2 entire plays. So much for William's plan to make his dad proud of him. To be fair, critics suspected the father and son duo of having worked together, also believing that one young man could not possibly have done everything by himself. At the same time William published his confession, Samuel published an essay trying to vindicate his son, as he still believed that William could not possibly have done all of this on his own. Since this was released at the same time as William's confession, the public saw it as Samuel's blatant attempt to make his son the scapegoat. Samuel died just a few years later in 1800 before his reputation could be restored. William's reputation would never recover. So, a teenage boy forged numerous correspondence to and from Shakespeare, all of which fooled experts at first, wrote an entire lost Shakespeare play, which he sold and saw produced by professional actors, then spent the rest of his life penniless and in and out of debtor's prison. All this is because his dad didn't give him a hug once in a while. Sometimes an item can be authentic, yet still be the subject of hoaxes. Such is the case with the Codex Gigas, also known as the Devil's Bible. The book would be remarkable on its own, as it's the largest medieval book in the world. The Codex is 36 inches tall, 20 inches wide, and 8.7 inches thick. It was originally 320 pages long, though the last 10 pages were removed at some point in history. It was such an impressive book that it immediately became the thing of legends. According to the story, the Codex Gigas is the work of Herman the Recluse, a Benedictine monk who was condemned to death after breaking his monastic vows. In his plea for his life, he offered to write a book containing all human knowledge in a single night. The abbot accepted his offer, so Herman got to work. When midnight came and Herman realized that he was fated to be walled in and starved to death, he knew that prayer was his only hope of survival. Herman prayed to the fallen angel Lucifer, offering his soul in exchange for the ability to finish the book in time. Out of gratitude for saving his life, Herman included a full-page portrait of the devil, which was an extremely unusual inclusion in a text of this nature. The Codex Gigas was written in the early 1200s, but there are numerous accounts from the Middle Ages that this fake origin story was already being passed around and was widely accepted as fact. In 1697, a fire broke out in the royal castle in Stockholm where the book was being held. Wanting to preserve the codex, the 165-pound book was thrown out of a window where it landed and injured a bystander. This only added to the mystique of the book, helping to perpetuate the myth of its origin. As for the contents of the book, they're really pretty mundane. Despite the name The Devil's Bible, the giant manuscript is just a compilation of the complete Old and New Testaments, as well as several other books about history and medicine that were popular at the time. Although it was taken as fact for centuries, there is no reason to believe that the Codex Gigas is of supernatural origin. Though it is believed to have been written by a single person, quite possibly named Herman, it appears to be the culmination of 30 years of tireless effort rather than a single night of black magic.